Good afternoon, everybody. It is Monday, December 12th, and we are here for our state legislative update. Hope everybody had a nice weekend. And we have a number of folks in the audience want to welcome Delegate Sarah Love here on the behalf of the delegation. And I see Senator Ben Kramer, who is going to be speaking later on, I presume. And so without any further ado, Ms. McCartney-Green, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Council President. Before you today for our state legislative discussion, it's really a continuation of our local and bi-county bill review. I'm sorry, but today my colleague is not here with me, Ms. Christine Wellings, but I will be filling in and hoping to channel her and a lot of the comments that she has here concerning some of our bills for today. With that being said, the bills that are in your chart are scheduled for a public hearing this Thursday, and positions taken today may be used if necessary for that public hearing. With that said, I'm going to continue. There are attendees, as you mentioned, Council President, in the audience, OIR, Acting Chair Jeff Sions, WSSC representatives, and MCCP representatives as well. There's no other comments. I'm going to start on chart one, page 1 of our chart with MC 323, Montgomery County voting methods. So we discussed this bill is enabling legislation that would allow the county to enact a law providing for ranked choice voting. The bill authorized, but it does not require the council to pass a law regarding ranked choice voting. The majority of the cost to implement such a voting system would be paid for the county. Council staff recommendation here is to support this bill.
Thank you very much. I appreciate Delegate Polakovich-Carr for introducing this legislation this year, as has been passed numerous years. I believe the delegation has supported it, as has this council. And I think in respect to the last election that we had, or the elections of this last year, when we had one election with a 32 vote margin, I think it underscores the fact that we should do everything possible to make sure that every opinion counts. And the will of the voters is ultimately heard, and I'll continue supporting ranked choice voting, and we'll support the staff recommendation. I see Councilmember Stewart.
Great. Thank you, Council President Evan Glass. I just wanted to speak today and remind folks that the City of Tacoma Park has had ranked choice voting since 2007, and I can speak to the fact that it has gone smoothly. The voters have reacted very well to it. Our Board of Elections has reported after each election that we've had good election turnout and understanding among the voters, and very few voter errors in using ranked choice voting. In addition, Fair Vote has done 2 exit polls over the years of voters leaving polls in Tacoma Park, and I'm happy to share those results with my colleagues or other folks who would like to see them. As of December 2022, Fair Vote has reported that ranked choice voting is available in 62 jurisdictions in the United States. 2 states, 2 counties, and 58 cities now have it in place. We've seen across the country that ranked choice voting helps more women and people of color get elected to positions. There's less negativity in campaigning, and it has increased voter participation. So I'm glad in the past prior county councils have supported moving forward with ranked choice voting, and I hope we do so today. Thank you.
You got my #1 spot with that. That was great. If there are no other comments, we'll support staff recommendation without objection. Very good.
Moving on to MC 723, which is also a voting system for ranked choice for inclusion for the City of Tacoma Park municipal elections on the state ballot. This bill is also very similar to the previous discussion with ranked choice, along with approval voting. Council staff suggestion here is that to seek more information from the Board of Election. While ranked choice may be supported, the council staff was not able to ascertain the fiscal impact that it would be for this bill. Some of the key factors that may impact the fiscal impact is the cost of transitioning, acquiring more equipment, labor, outreach to voters, and whether the size of the jurisdictions. And so with that, the recommendation here was to hold until additional information is gathered to ascertain that number.
Councilmember Stewart would like to speak.
Great. Thank you, and I appreciate the staff recommendation, but I'm going to ask my colleagues to move forward with support. If we are moving forward with support for ranked choice voting, it makes sense that when we're contracting in the future for machines that they are able to do ranked choice voting in the future. Given Tacoma Park's experience, they actually now have to rent machines out of state to do this, and I think if we want to encourage not just Montgomery County to do this, but other municipalities to move towards ranked choice voting, we should make it easier for them to do it, and we should have machinery that's available to do so in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Mink.
Thank you, Council President. I'm also hoping that our colleagues will support this bill to continue moving ranked choice voting forward. It's an effort to get the RCV compatibility requirement into Maryland for the next election vendor contract. So timing matters here. And we do have the state taking on the cost of voting machines. So I'm confident that we can work out the details and the benefits will outweigh the costs here.
Excellent, thank you. And I'll also add that one of the sticking points in Annapolis where people have chosen not to move ranked choice voting forward is because they're concerned about the compatibility. And so if that's built into the system, I think that adds more argument to move forward. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. Yeah, I also agree with my colleagues. I think we should move this forward. There's other jurisdictions in the state that want to move forward with ranked choice voting. So it just makes sense to, as we move forward with procurement, to have that as and sometimes we can have buying power, they can go in together. I just think this is a smart move, so would also recommend we move it forward. Thank you.
Yep, Councilmember Albanaz.
I just autocorrect. I meant to write speak, but it came out seal. So I'm inclined to go in line with my colleagues' request that we move this forward, but I do have questions of the Board of Elections regarding sort of implementation, and there isn't anyone here from the Board of Elections, is there?
No, there's not that I know of.
Okay. And I know, I understand timing is an issue here. Could you articulate a little bit more why we would need to do this right now as opposed to, say, 2 weeks from now or when we come back in January?
There's still an opportunity to gather more information or for the council to delay its position. And so, as we mentioned, that we've reached out to State Board of Elections but have not been able to specifically ascertain that number. When the bill is assigned in the State General Assembly, we'll receive a fiscal note which will provide a little bit more perspective on, can't guarantee the timing on that, but that's usually the process for bills that are in the General Assembly.
Okay. And I know that just as generally speaking, after each election cycle, our Board of Elections assesses everything that went well and what needs to be changed. And I know the challenges with regards to timing of the certification of the elections was, and I continue to be just so impressed by our Board of Elections, the staff, the volunteers who work so diligently every day. But I have heard from some of our colleagues in the Board of Elections that given the large number of mail-in votes, that there likely will be some fiscal impacts moving forward to help make sure that we're in a better position to be able to certify elections more quickly moving forward. So there will likely be more than just this budget impact in the upcoming election cycle. And I think we would do well by looking at this through a broader lens, just considering the potential fiscal impacts. But I'm inclined to support what colleagues have put forward, reserving the right once we do receive feedback on what this might cost and if there are any other unintended consequences or issues with technology that we may not be aware of. I request that we revisit this when we get that information.
And I appreciate Councilmember Albanaz's comments about taking a look back at what happened during this election and whether that is a committee conversation at the Government Operations or a full council. We definitely, that definitely warrants a conversation. Councilmember Mink.
Thank you. And this is also related to the good points that Councilmember Albanaz raised around fiscal impact. Would certainly appreciate if the state would look into potentially putting in language around absorbing additional costs, such as for voter education and outreach. They did put in there that they will absorb the cost of voting machines, but especially as we can hopefully encourage other municipalities and counties and so on to pursue ranked choice voting, I think there would probably be, we would benefit from economies of scale if we can receive some funding assistance for some of the additional costs as well.
Very good. Not having everybody else wanting to speak, I think there's a consensus to move forward with a support rather than what staff recommends. Everyone in agreement on that? Support this legislation? There we go.
Thank you. Moving on to page 2, looking at MCPG 10623, Montgomery County off-street parking requirements near mass transit systems. Council staff does want to note that there was a prior hearing that was on December 8th, and so this was one of the bills that was not included in the prior packet. But this bill would prohibit Montgomery County from enacting or enforcing any local law that requires creation of new off-street parking or residential development located within 0.25 mile radius of an existing planned metro line or station. The concern here is that this bill would restrict the authority of the council regarding off-street parking. The decision for land use and zoning matters related to parking should not be taken from the council. Further, this may affect existing parking listed district agreements. Even though the hearing has already been held, it's still important for the council to at least consider for future work sessions and thereafter.
Thank you for that overview. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a question on this. So this is described as prohibiting a law, which presumably would include a zoning change. Would it also prohibit, there's different levels of where parking minimums or things like this could occur. One is in the zoning code, one is a law by the county council, and then there's at the planning board site plan approval and other regulatory review processes. Is this prohibiting at every level? Is this only prohibiting in the zoning code or through some other law at the county council? I just want to make sure we're understanding, because it's been talked about in different ways, and I just want to make sure we clarify that.
Thank you, Councilor. I am going to ask Dr. Orland to join us at the table just to give a little bit more of a broader perspective on this.
Dr. Orland is not here.
Okay, if he's not here, one of the things I wanted to turn the council to is the Councilor Friedson, let me make sure I check with Dr. Orland before I speak on this. I want to make sure that we're in alignment with that, and so I'm happy to expound on that at a later time.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, I guess I appreciate the preemption argument. I think it's really important. I think we have to be very careful about those issues. But philosophically, I also fundamentally believe that parking should be market-based, that we shouldn't be driving up the cost of housing and doing it in a way that subsidizes a behavior that we're desperately trying to get out of, which is to get people out of their reliance on single occupancy vehicles and using transit that we're increasingly trying to invest more and more in. So I'll wait to hear what colleagues have to say on this, but I appreciate the sponsors putting this forward, and I think that there's a lot of merit to eliminating parking minimums, but I am sensitive to the concern that's raised on preemption.
And there are a number of colleagues who have something to say. Next up, Councilmember Mink.
I think I'm largely aligned with Councilmember Friedson on this. I really support and appreciate the effort here. And I realize that there are concerns around the, how this would restrict the authority of the county government. I would offer that there are some ways in which Maryland already does intrude on local action with climate and zoning issues with respect to stormwater, asphalt, some other things. And this being a case where if we're in agreement that this is what we ultimately want, that this is the type of policy making and zoning that we want, that this is an opportunity for Montgomery County to mark itself as a leader in this space to encourage this piece of legislation. I would also be supportive of a county-led piece of legislation that does the same thing or stronger, and would be eager to talk with my colleagues about that as well. I would also offer that California, Oregon, Minnesota, and others have also done similar pieces of legislation that also move state authority over local governments for purposes such as this one. So this may be an opportunity where generally, yes, I would fall to agreeing with we want to hold on to our local ability around these measures, but I would see this as an opportunity for an exception for a positive outcome.
Thank you. Councilmember Luedke.
I agree with Vice President Friedson's analysis, and I have concerns about the bill as drafted because it specifically only applies to Montgomery County when it's referencing the purple line, and of course we have metro stations that are not just inside Montgomery County, so I'm not really entirely sure why the state would be doing legislation that impacts one county and not the other end where the other metro stations are. If you're looking for parity and consistency in policy and not having those parking places in that 0.25 mile radius. So I also have concerns about the fact that the language in section 22109C says present or planned. So it's not clear what they mean ever after, any other that comes up if we are expanding transit, or is it just about anything that is planned or being planned presently at the time this law goes into effect. So that's a bit of a drafting hang up for me. So as written, I am opposed to that, but I am in support of restricting parking, off-street parking, new off-street parking around the 2.25 mile radius of transit. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I agree with what much has been said. I do believe that we have to be very cautious in the county giving up any of its authority. And in many cases for planning, it's on a case-by-case basis. And so I think that we should oppose this legislation if we decide that to Councilmember Mink's point, if we decide that the county should have its own legislation, then that would be the place for something like this. But to allow the state to tell us that we would have no flexibility, no option, to me would be a wrong way to go about this. So I am opposed. I agree with staff's recommendation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Balcom.
Yes, I agree with the concept of this bill. I think it's something that we've been trying to do, and agree with the premise of limiting parking. But I agree with the concept of a county-led bill. If this is something that we want, and it's something I think that many of us agree with, we should be able to draft that and legislate that, understanding all the nuances that go into planning, because it's not a one-size-fits-all, and we should be able to do that locally. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. We had a ZTA that I introduced that would have changed parking minimums near transit, but also allow for different type of housing types, something I hope this council will take up as part of the implementation of Thrive. And so we will have robust discussion. I do have concerns. It's great having my other lawyer at the other end here, and Ms. Luedke, about the language. The same thing with Prince George's County having purple line in transit stations, and the fact that there are current things that we've already done, like in Bethesda, for example, that would be potentially impacted unless they're grandfathered in. I'm unclear on that in reading this bill. I am in favor of obviously the getting rid of the off-street parking requirements near mass transit, but as we all know, our county is very different depending on where you live. Not everywhere is exactly the same, and the distinction between planned or actually in place could have big impacts on certain communities. We've seen how long the purple line has taken to come to fruition, for example. So I don't think we need to oppose. I would say just hold or not take a position, because I don't want to send this, I don't want to say that we're not in favor. This is a policy objective. So I would say probably not take a position, and then that we would work on this at the local level. It sounds like there's broad agreement that everyone wants to, so I think that the likelihood that we would be high. So thank you.
Thank you, and just a reminder for everybody, the four options that are typically before us is support the legislation, oppose the legislation, have no opinion, or seek more information. Councilmember Stewart.
Great. Thank you. I'll just say I agree with my colleagues. Thank you very much. And I just wanted to build on what Councilmember Giwando, the point he just made about how each place is a bit different in our county, and as Councilwoman Balcom said. And one of the concerns I had, in addition to those that have already been raised, is we know our transit system isn't fully connected in our county, and there are some people who unfortunately still do need to drive to Metro and to future Purple Line stops to then get to their destination on public transit. And so I'd like to consider how this type of legislation would then impact our planning, so that we're not in the future actually not encouraging people to take transit, and having that be something that comes out of this. And so I agree with Councilmember Giwando that taking, I think you were putting forward taking no position on this, because I believe this council probably philosophically believes in the direction of what the drafters were intending to do with this, but the preemption is looms over us, and I think we should take the time, as Councilwoman Balcom said, to do this ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. I will just add my own personal thoughts, is that I think this is a laudable goal, and everything that we as a community, as a county, have been working toward with regard to our land use policy and transit policy has been in line with the goal of this legislation. I am less concerned about some of the specifics that my colleagues have highlighted regarding the discrepancies between Prince George's County and Montgomery County. We have different land use plans on the Purple Line and around our metro stations, and so that would be obvious. There would be discrepancies already. But I think my bigger question, and this leads into a conversation I know we're going to have later on, is that if we have a state-mandated Park and Planning Commission, the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, what is the state's role in that? And so I don't think it is out of line for the state and our state lawmakers to weigh in on planning decisions, since the state has already, for the last 95 to nearly 100 years, required us to have a bi-county agency devoted to land use and planning. So for that reason, I think the goal is a laudable one. The specifics of every metro site and every Purple Line site varying, which is why I would request that we take no opinion on this, so that we can work towards a goal that clearly the sponsors of this legislation share with us. And not seeing anybody else speaking, there are two divergent opinions on the dais, those that oppose this legislation and those that want no opinion. All those who oppose this legislation, raise your hand. All those who would want no opinion on the legislation? And it is no opinion. So, Ms. McCartney-Green, please note that. They said we don't have to do that. Yeah.
I've noted no position for MC 10623. Moving on to MCPG 10323, Washington Suburban Sanitarian Commission Minority Business Enterprise Utilization Program Revisions and Extension. And so this bill would revise the Minority Business Enterprise Utilization Program of WSSC. Among other things, it would clarify that the purpose of the program is to remedy discrimination. In addition, it would extend the MBE program for another 5 years. Just to give the council a bit of background, WSSC is required to do a disparity study of its MBE program. As a result of the disparity study that was released this past November, there were a couple of findings that was alluded in the report. The link to the report is on the bottom of page 3, just for your reference. But the study showed that there was a statistical evidence of persistent discrimination of businesses against minority and women-owned business as well. It was significant and substantial, in both the private and public sector within WSSC's waters marketplace. In addition, the contractor that was used also conducted a qualitative and anecdotal activities to understand the discriminatory experiences of the vendors in the marketplace. The results of these activities were also consistent with presence of discrimination against the minority and women business enterprise. With that, council staff is recommending the bill will clarify the program is to remedy that discrimination and to give an opportunity for WSSC to continue that program for another 5 years.
Without objection, support staff recommendation.
Our next bill to review is MC 1023, and I'll note that 1023 and MCPG 10323 is very similar in terms of the language that's laid out concerning collective bargaining agreement implementation and impasse arbitration. And so specifically, MC 1023 would allow HOC or to employees bargaining representative to declare an impasse or deadlock in the bargaining process and to seek an appointment of an arbitrator or a mediator. That mediator would require the parties to follow a certain process, and the mediator would choose a final and best offer of one of the parties. Council staff has reached out to MCGO just to get more information or input, still pending on receiving that. But council staff did receive a letter of opposition from HOC that's included in your packet on Circle 20. HOC did list out a few notable reasons of why they opposed the legislation. Our recommendation here is to hold on this. I do know that the county executive has put support with clarifying amendments, and that's noted in their memorandum.
Thank you. Councilmember Mink.
Yeah, we were able to reach McGeo, and they do support this measure. They say that HOC and MNCPPC's attorney is arguing that there's a loophole in the state law that excludes wage reopeners from binding arbitration. So this would clarify the intent of the law to include all aspects of bargaining to the binding arbitration process, including the mid-contract wage readjustments. So, and they also noted that otherwise it would be incentivized to spend more resources negotiating those one-year agreements. So that's another motivator.
Thank you for that information. Councilmember Ludke.
Yeah, I had a question, and I don't know, the way it's drafted, it does not require a specific amount of time to have negotiated in good faith prior to the declaration of an impasse. It just, there's no time at all. So one side or the other could just say, I don't want to do this. I don't want to have those discussions. I just want to go to binding arbitration. And that's problematic for me in terms of the process of folks coming to the bargaining table and acting in good faith for either side, but that there isn't any sort of timing requirement or trigger before one or the other party can move. So I don't know if that's something you could get clarification on, or if there's.
Yeah, my understanding that there's not a good faith, but it's not specific, so it's something that I can get more information on.
Thank you. Councilmember Sales.
Thank you, Council President. I support the staff's recommendation to hold. This legislation is supposed to make it easier for arbitration to not take place. It brings the parties to the table to ensure that they are able to make good decisions. And if we're having the hearing on Thursday, is there really a rush to make a decision until we hear from the public and other folks who want to testify on behalf of this legislation? Is there a decision to support and move forward, or can we hold until we get more information?
Well, the reason it's on today's agenda is because it will receive a hearing later this week.
Yes.
And so we could do various options if we want to weigh in before the delegation, or we can wait until the legislative session officially starts. That is our prerogative. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate Councilmember Mink sharing the information from McGeo, and I hope that can be shared more formally with all of us when you receive that. I had one other question. Also, clarifying mediation versus arbitration. They're two different things, and I want to make sure that in the legislation that understanding what is the intent and what is it directing or allowing to have happen, because one, as you know, I almost called you a delegate, as Councilmember Lukey, talked about the timing of things, setting expectations and understanding that difference would be important. Thank you.
Chief Legislative Officer Lukey, but yes, Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez.
Is it possible to get reps from NCPPC here to answer any questions on this? Or actually, share your views on this, I should say. Thank you.
Just want to clarify, this is for HOC, and that the subsequent bill is...
Just get ready for the next one.
Well, to Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez, HOC has weighed in and in opposition, right? Yes. And HOC, right? And so if you're seeking clarification, I think now would be the time.
Hi, council members. It's wonderful to be here. I'm Ken Silverman, Director of Government Relations for HOC.
You share your views on this or your opinion?
Sure. There was a letter in the back of your packet. In short, HOC feels that the current system is working well. It does require binding arbitration for the full contract negotiations, but then those midterm adjustments, it follows a process that's laid out in the collective bargaining agreement. So we feel that this is something that could be addressed through those negotiations. To Councilmember Lukey, your point's exactly right. The way the bill is drafted, there would be no minimum amount of time before a party could declare impasse and move to arbitration. And in the current process, there's a 5-month period for bargaining for the full contracts before impasse is reached, and my understanding, which is not, hasn't reached a full depth yet, but generally the mediator and arbitrator is the same person or same panel, and it's really up to that person once they're appointed to decide how long they want to force the parties to remain in mediation before deciding that there's not going to be an agreement and they want to move to a binding arbitration process. But either way, it does ultimately end up in a binding arbitration where the arbitrator can make a decision, which ultimately is very, very difficult to challenge in court. And for non-economic issues, the commission would have no ability to overrule or appeal the arbitrator's decision. So you could have certain issues that are more policy considerations that end up being decided by an arbitrator that may not have expertise in housing in our case.
Thank you for that explanation. It's very similar to what I went through when I was in the Park and Planning Commission, but I'm going to let them speak after you.
Thank you. Councilmember Mink.
Thank you for that. I also wanted to note that McGeo can't be here because they're in bargaining right now, of course. But I know that Senator Kramer is here, and I wondered if you might like to come up and talk about some of your motivations behind putting this together.
Thank you for that, Councilmember Mink. I appreciate the opportunity. Good afternoon.
Turn your mic on. Not that you need it, but
not
for
that I need it. Thank
those
you.
who are not here.
Yes, I appreciate the opportunity to quickly mention the fact that the county already has in place the provisions for the county that we are seeking now to also have apply to our friends at HOC and at MNC PPC. I will also share with you all that the same objections to out-of-cycle binding arbitration were the arguments that MNC PPC and HOC made about binding arbitration, period. That they had outstanding working relationship with the employees, and this would somehow make that uncomfortable for the employees and management should there be binding arbitration. What I will proffer to you is that without binding arbitration, there's no collective bargaining. The reason this has even come up, and I can tell you McGeo's sentiment, and it has not gone to court, and they're looking to avoid that, is that right now HOC and MNC PPC are in fact required to abide by binding arbitration out of cycle as well as in cycle. MNC PPC is the one that stepped up and said, no, we don't think so. So we're not going to negotiate about certain topics here or move forward on them because our position is it doesn't apply to out of cycle. The intent of this legislation is to clarify that issue before it goes to court and actually does the same thing for both entities that currently exists for the county. That is the extent of what this does. I hope that offers some clarification, and certainly I would welcome any questions.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. And I think we heard some concerns about an arbitrator not understanding housing issues and so on. I don't know that those are germane to this issue, which is about mid-cycle wage adjustments. I wanted to see if you supported the technical amendments that were mentioned by the county, that were suggested by the county executive, who noted that it would be simpler from a drafting perspective to just amend or add language to the existing state law around this. Do you have thoughts about that?
And thank you for that question. That puts an exclamation mark on the point that I just made. The recommendation, by the way, when a bill goes to bill drafting in Annapolis, you're never quite sure how it may come out. You make the request, here's the goal, here's what you get. Very wisely, our friends here at the county pointed out that we really could have just cut to the chase and said, MNC, PPC, and HOC just simply need to comply with Montgomery County government's bargaining regulations and be done with it. Because as I said earlier, the county does that now with binding arbitration in and out of cycle. So I think that is the reference that you've made as to what that technical amendment might be, just to show there was a simpler way to get there. And I will be happy to work with the county as well as the delegation moving forward to make whatever the most simplistic path we can take to get there. I'm happy to do that and have that conversation. But I'm confident we can address whatever the issue is with the exec on making sure we get there in the simplest form.
Great, thank you. That's all my questions. I
Thank
think that my colleagues will support or support with amendments.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Councilmember Mink. Councilmember Jawando.
Senator Kramer, don't go anywhere yet. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
What you got?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Just to clarify, and from council staff, there's no time period to declare an impasse under current county negotiations. You're saying it's the exact same process, correct?
Yes, so the goal here is to do for HOC and park and planning what currently exists for the county.
Which, just to be clear, and council staff can chime in too, but I just want to confirm, one of the points that was brought up, under the current HOC contract, there's a 5-month time period. So if under this bill, there would be no time period, and that So that's number one. I understand that to be the case. Number two, and that would be consistent with current county negotiations. Either side can declare an impasse and request a mediated arbitrator?
That is my understanding, and the goal here is to simply apply what currently exists for the county to HOC and MNC PPC.
Okay. Ms. Attorney, is that correct?
Yeah, so the clarification on timing is not clear from the bill here, but currently there is a waiting period or a time period for the full cycle or in-cycle collective bargaining.
Well, the question that I'm asking is about county negotiations. I just want to get on the record from someone who 100% is sure that under county negotiations between our collective bargaining units, and maybe Ms. Michelson knows, that at any time someone can declare an impasse and request a mediator arbitrator. Is that correct?
Councilmember Jawando, I think we'd have to check this to make sure we give you an accurate answer. It seems to me that there are a lot of questions that are coming up that we can't answer right on the spot, but we'll be happy to follow up.
I appreciate that. I just think that's important. If what you say, I like consistency, and so if that is the case, that's a compelling argument to me. I hadn't heard it prior to just this moment. I would recommend that we hold and find out that information. That would be compelling to me. If that was the case, I would be in favor. So that's just my position. Thank you.
Good logic. You can't argue with it.
I agree with the consistency across all bargaining units, but we're not quite sure what the specifics there are. So what I'm hearing, there are colleagues who want to support this, and there are colleagues who probably want to support staff recommendation, which is hold for more information. All those who support this legislation, raise your hand. All those who want to hold for more information, here you go. We will hold for more information. And Senator Kramer, you might want to just put your seatbelt on for the next few
Happy
items.
to hang around.
There you go. Ms. McCartney-Green.
And so the next bill also addresses collective bargaining and arbitrator or dispute resolution. And so this is the same language that the council just deliberated on, but now this is referring to NCPP and its employees. Just wanted to make a technical correction. In the chart, it says HOC. It should actually say parking planning, or MNCCP is just a correction there. So the council may want to obtain their representatives' views on it. I know they're in the room, Council President. So our position here is to hold. There is an addendum in the packet that includes an opposition statement from Park and Planning. And so with that, I do know that there's also the support with clarifying amendments that has been offered by DC as well.
If representatives from Park and Planning would like to come up. Hi there.
Good afternoon.
Yep, turn your mic on if you identify yourself.
Good afternoon, Council. My name is Asantha Chang Smith. I am the Executive Director for the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission.
And for the record, I'm William Spencer. I'm the Acting Deputy Executive Director for the Commission.
Good morning. I'm Jordan Baucom Colbert, Government Affairs Liaison for the Commission and General Counsel.
Thank you. Now, previously, Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez had asked your thoughts, so I will read her mind and ask you your thoughts on this legislation.
Okay, sure. I just wanted to give you just a little bit of backstory of why McGeo really has been pushing for this. This has to do with negotiations that we had that were not on finances, they were on policy. And this is the biggest point that we have a lot of objection to. If you mandate binding arbitration, you have an arbitrator who is not appointed by people who are elected by our voters, somebody who can make decisions based on their personal experience, not on the mission of the organization or the priorities. And we're very concerned about that, because if the arbitrator makes a decision, it is final, and it is very, very difficult to repeal it. And I'll give you the example, and I'll tell you exactly what happened. Last year, our commission and our commissioners met for over 2 hours. They were very concerned about COVID. And we serve populations, hundreds and thousands of people in our counties, almost 2 million people. And many of them we serve, we have daycare centers where we, provide services for infants who are just 2 months old and older. We provide services for senior citizens. We have these centennial events because some of these people in our communities are over 100 years old and they are a little frail. We also serve people with cognitive and physical disabilities. And I remember that was the most impassioned 2 hours I had seen. And I know Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez, you remember that. You remember that. And the big concern was not necessarily, oh, well, is it, politically feasible, but it had to do about the safety of the people we serve in our communities. And so we mandated that all our employees receive the COVID vaccination. We were worried that if they didn't, we could inadvertently give it to somebody and they could perish. And that was just really unthinkable. McGeo took the position that they wanted to negotiate. We also negotiated with our other union, the FOP, and our police officers understood that they're dealing with the public also, and they came into agreement with us, understanding the timeliness of the matter. McGeo instead took us to court. So it is, and I know they characterize it as a loophole, but it is not a loophole. It is something that is very specific. We went into mediation, and as we have good relationships with our unions, we will go into mediation and agree to mediation. They wanted to go into binding arbitration, and we said, no, this is that important to our commission and to the policy to preserve the programs that we put forward to our counties. And so they did. They took us to the labor relations administrator, and they actually took it to the circuit court. So they did take us to court, and they lost. And so we were threatened. They said, well, we lost this time, but what we're going to do then is we're going to go ahead and we're going to get the law changed. So this actually did go to court, and it did not go in their favor. So that is the real deal there. And I'll tell you, with the recent election and the change in policy for cannabis, there are going to be other big policy decisions as employers that we are going to have to make. And it would really be a big disservice to have it go to binding arbitration on some of these matters that are very, very sensitive to the policy on how we who are hired and we who are appointed to run these programs, how we are going to administer these programs. So I wanted to make that very clear. On another point, I wanted to mention that we are chartered by the state, and we are truly a bi-county organization. Prince George's County does not have binding arbitration. They do not. They can, their counsel, if they say, you know what, that's what the arbitrator said, but they'll say, nope, we don't agree with it, and the county can reject it. So it is not even across the board. And the state, as I mentioned, we're chartered by the state. The state doesn't have binding arbitration either. So we would be put at a disadvantage. It would almost be like negotiating with one hand behind our back. We truly would be. And, I would say that over the past 26 years that we have been in negotiations, we have had a really good relationship with our unions. Sometimes we have tough issues we have to negotiate with, but at the end of the day, the members of the unions are our employees who we care about very much, and we want the best for them as well. And so we do work in partnership, and we do work together. And that's why I think the term unnecessary, it's not something that is really needed, because we do, at the end of the day, serve the same purpose for the good of those employees and those members. Thank you.
Thank you for that context. I appreciate you highlighting the differences in policy between Prince George's County, the state of Maryland, and Montgomery County. My personal opinion is we are in Montgomery County, and we have various laws with regard to labor negotiation. And as majority of my colleagues noted earlier, we do want consistency across the board. We have to figure out exactly what those details might be, but for those reasons, I would continue supporting staff recommendation to hold for more information. Without objection? Any objection? Without a...
I would support with technical amendments, same as for the last.
Okay. All those in support of holding for more information, raise your hand. There you go. Ms. McCartney-Green, we're going to hold for more information.
Moving on to the next bill, MCPG 10423. It's also a park and planning bill that's concerning the reconstruction or establishing a commission for reconstruction task force. The bill would establish a task force to study the feasibility of transferring the Montgomery County, from transferring park and plannings from the county. And it would also provide recommendations as well on whether the commission would not include the county. I do want to note that council staff, along with Ms. Michelson and others, have gone through a legislative history of looking back of, has this been done before? And further down in your packet in the staff notes, it refers to there in 1986, there was a blue ribbon committee that was established by Montgomery County by the former county executive Gilchrist to study the county's planning and development process. And at that time, it recommended that the planning board and the chair be appointed by the CE. Yet, only 5 years later, in 1991, the new council established a new task force to re-examine whether or not to, sorry, as I turn my page, to examine planning and development process. And so this committee recommended restoring the appointment and planning process back with the county council. So just wanted to clarify that right now the way how the task force would be established is majority of the members, at least 9 that I've highlighted or identified, would be selected by the CE, and 3 would be selected by the county council, the council president, and the council president would be able to select 2 other members from the public. With that, the position here from council staff is to oppose the bill and to have senior legislative analyst Ms. Dunn here, as well as the acting chair, Mr. Jeff Zions, who's here to provide further context.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. McCartney-Green. Interim Chair Zions, thank you for joining us. You anticipated my request that you join us at the dais, but first, Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez would like to speak.
Bear with me. So I would like to start by addressing the great respect I have for the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission and the thousands of individuals who work there. These are folks who are completely dedicated to making both Montgomery and Prince George's counties be an amazing and vibrant place to call home. Speaking specifically on the Montgomery County side, as many of you know, I was appointed to the Park and Planning Commission in 2014 and reappointed in 2018, and then after that I became the Planning Board's vice chair. I resigned in 2021 to run for office, and here I am. I can tell you, based on my experience there, our Park and Planning Commission is a unique bi-county institution to be proud of. It's an award-winning agency for their outstanding work products, receiving prestigious regional and national awards for the work planning board members like myself did alongside planning professionals. I think of the Bethesda Downtown Master Plan, the Bearsmith Corridor Master Plan, receiving national recognitions, and our Parks Department receiving numerous awards for their placemaking initiatives that are actually pretty innovative. I must tell you, these 2 pieces of legislation targeting the commission pains me deeply. We should be working and supporting our park and planning staff, individuals who, after the unfortunate series of events led by former individual planning board members, they never gave up. They kept working non-stop, making sure site plans and work programs were on track as they waited for the temporary planning board to be installed. We should be supporting them, not attacking them with pieces of legislation that do nothing but creating more stress among staff members. We in Montgomery County deserve way better than this. From the top, this is not a blue ribbon task force that will analyze alternative structures and compare them to the current structure and make recommendations. This legislation instead requires an alternative structure where parking planning is housed in the executive branch, where the county executive has a carte blanche over planning along desired outcome from Mr. Eldridge, and chiefs the task force reach the desired outcome. That's bad process and bad policy. Further, the proposed membership of the task force, 9 members selected by the county executive to only 3 selected by the council, only further biases the outcome. On the idea itself, the parking planning should be an executive branch agency who will get planning that is less transparent, less diverse in its views, and further away from the communities that it will impact. This is because the legislative branch, with 11 council members from across the county, including 7 districts and 4 at large, will be, by definition, be closer to the people, have a wider range of views on planning, and to appoint a more well-rounded and diverse board. Based on my experience, I can tell you, and with no shame, in 2014, when I came up to the now county executive Mark Eldridge, he was a county council member back then, and I told him that I wanted to apply for the Parking Planning Commission. He told me straight in my face, no, you don't have the qualifications. I had to get coalitions to target him, to support me. If it had been up to him, no Latinos would have been on the Parking Planning Commission yet. I'm the only one so far, the first millennial there. If we wait for just one person to be appointing the planning board, I think that's absolutely wrong, and actually it will take us backwards. And it's not that we have not been down this road before, as it was explained. The idea of giving the county executive control over the planning was tried in 1986, as she pointed out, and it was reversed only 5 years later. It's also telling that this legislation in 0523 don't have any co-sponsors. Let me just highlight that. Bottom line, while the most recent planning board had its problems, that was unique to the individual members, not the structure itself. Furthermore, let me remind you that the Maryland National Capital Parking Planning Commission and the current structure has served the county very well, and I am confident that the current acting board and the regular members that will be appointed this spring by this council will be outstanding, and I'll be watching closely to make sure that each one of them do their job. And with that, I'm asking my colleagues to oppose this piece of legislation, and I gotta say, you know, this is like the first week that we have as a council member, and having this now after all the trauma that just happened is just really heartbreaking. We're better than this. So I'm not gonna keep talking because then I'll get more upset. Go ahead.
Thank you, Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez. Next up, Councilmember Balcom.
Thank you. I cannot speak as eloquently as Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez on this issue, but I do want to speak with the same conviction. I want to say, I want to touch specifically on the issue of MNCCPP staff. This is just the wrong time to throw chaos into the mix. They have already been through something very traumatic for them, and they're doing their jobs every day. This is not the time to do that. And I want to go back to the discussion that we had about parking. If the county council, if the county executive thought that this was the time to look at the structure, we can do this ourselves. We can create a task force to look at how we locally, the county, will move forward on planning. So I feel strongly about that. I don't know if we want to talk about 10523 or we just want to focus just on this right now.
Well, let's stick to 10423.
Okay. So I just think that this task force is not necessary. It's something we can do on our own, and it's certainly not the time to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you. Really appreciate the passionate comments from my colleague, Fanny Gonzalez. And let me just say a few things. So on the last council, I've had just a brief conversation with the county executive with regards to this legislation to find out more from his perspective, the intent. And among the notes that he shared with me, or concerns that he shared with me, are that we are behind other jurisdictions in the permitting process and that it takes longer in Montgomery County than it does in other parts of the region. And he pointed out that that's one of probably many reasons why we have not been able to take full advantage of the assets that we have here within our community. And while I certainly understand and appreciate and respect that perspective, I would note that as recently as last year, under Councilmember Friedson's leadership, we worked with Park and Planning staff to create an expedited process to review life sciences permits as they were proposed, as one example. And so there are other ways for us to be able to address some of what can be legitimate concerns that are raised by our colleagues in the private sector and in the development community, because we do all share the same goal of the county advancing itself economically and doing so in a manner that is holistic. But there are other ways of doing this. And I'll note that we also have, of course, our own assets within county government, specifically the Office of Legislative Oversight, which has done outstanding work in looking at other ways that we may be able to improve upon current systems. And I think this is a unique opportunity in the upcoming year with a record number of board members coming online. And this won't be the only conversation we have regarding how we can improve upon the current structure that we have in place right now. So I understand and respect more or less the intent, but I think there's a better way of doing it than what has been presented to us in this current form. So for those reasons, I won't support this measure, but I'd like to work with the executive branch and see if there's another way we can address some of the concerns that he and his team have raised.
Thank you. Councilmember Sales.
Thank you, Council President Glass. I want to echo the sentiments of my colleague, Councilmember Albornoz. What transpired this past year with the Planning Commission, with passing Thrive, with the forced resignations, I do agree that more oversight into how our Planning Commission functions, how they're appointed, how this body oversees their functions should be studied. Whether the dynamics that were set forth in this legislation hold true, I think we should revisit the balance given the growth of this body and the importance of the Planning Commission. I think there needs to be more balanced contributions from the council in regards to who gets a vote on the confirmation of the incoming Planning Commission. And so while I won't oppose this, I am open to working with the public and working with our county executive to find a more balanced approach to selecting and overseeing the members of the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Sales. So I'll jump in here. The Park and Planning Commission was created, the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission was created nearly 100 years ago, in 1926. And as we've discussed today, there are a number of discrepancies that have been created amongst the jurisdictions with regard to labor law, with regard to conflict resolution, and we have to figure out how we get past that. And ultimately, this is about oversight and reform, because as has been noted, and I appreciate Councilmember Sales stating it the way she did, this has been an unprecedented year, where the council asked for the resignations of 5 planning board members and personnel decisions that are still being worked on, which is why we haven't been able to comment further. But people are asking about this 95-year-old, 96 98-year-old agency. And I consider myself a reformer. And I think if any time you have a government body that's 96 years old, you should talk about its utility. And as has been evident in the previous votes, I haven't supported giving those powers to the state. But we here should figure out how we allow those powers to operate. And I have concerns about the legislation, and so let me ask its sponsor, Senator Kramer, quite frankly, I have concerns about the makeup of the task force. And it seems from my simple observation that it is not evenly balanced and that it skews towards the county executive. So can you share with us why you crafted a task force with such a makeup?
Thank you, Council President. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to address the misrepresentations and the hyperbole that surrounds what really should be a common sense initiative that I believe this county council should overwhelmingly support. So my goal here, to begin with, is to separate the fact from the fiction. And folks, let me share with you. What I do because I believe it's in the best interest of the residents of Montgomery County. This bill that we're discussing has the sponsor name Senator Kramer on it. It doesn't say County Executive Mark Elrich. It says Senator Ben Kramer. I think I bring some credibility to this subject as the individual who has sponsored legislation to put an inspector general in our Park and Planning Commission, to put an inspector general in our WSSC. Why would I have done that? It's called good governance. It's called transparency. It's called representing the best interests of the people of Montgomery County. I appreciate the fact that Park and Planning Commission may have some beautiful ribbons and trophies and awards on their walls. Does that mean we are representing the best interests of our residents here in Montgomery County? Folks, when the Park and Planning Commission was founded in the 1920s, the population of Prince George's County and Montgomery County combined barely exceeded that of Allegheny County. Montgomery County had a population of 35,000 people 100 years ago when this commission was created. We have 1.2 million residents in Montgomery County right now. Is it that unreasonable to reflect on what other options and alternatives might be? But I have heard so much hyperbole about, oh my Lord, this is a power grab, it's this, it's that. And I will share with you, the beginning of that was a report from council staff 2 weeks ago, before not all the members of the council were seated that are here today, but the prior county council. And I will read to you a very brief piece of that, because this is where it began. Council report. This would change a very important dynamic in our county, which is we don't have an elected official that oversees land use and planning. We have a county council of many elected people who oversee land use and planning, with the authority to approve our master plans, change our master plans, and the zoning authority that goes along with our master plans. To take out our bi-county commission and place it under a county executive, this is a quote, one elected official is a very big change. That's where it began. I'm going to ask you all to read this very simple piece of legislation and share with me, and feel free, any one of you, stop me at the point in time where you see anything that states land use and planning will be taken from the purview of this body and placed under the county executive's purview. Stop me when you see it, because I've heard it, but I can't find where it is in the bill. Here's what the bill says. There's a task force. The task force shall study the feasibility. And I'm going to pause there. I went to Merriam-Webster to look at the definition of feasibility because evidently it was lost on staff. The definition of feasibility is capable of being done or carried out. So what's this task force doing? It's looking at the capability of being done or carried out of transferring the duties of the Montgomery County Planning Board, the Planning Department, and the Parks Department of the MNC PPC to the Montgomery County government. Are you all Montgomery County government? I believe you are. I don't see where it says it's going to go to the county executive, but that's what I've heard. You all are Montgomery County government. It continues to read, it will make recommendations, quote unquote, recommendations. How does Merriam-Webster define recommendations? To suggest an act or course of action. To suggest. So it says, make recommendations on restructuring the Park and Planning Commission to no longer include Montgomery County. That's what the task force does. You've heard it in its entirety. This task force can change nothing, nothing in law. I've heard, oh, the sky is falling. The executive is going to seize this power from us. My name's on this bill, not the county executive. I commend the county executive for having the foresight to say that he supports this as being good governance legislation, but let's move on. We're going to take a look at the composition of the task force.
Senator Kramer,
No, Mr. President, you invited me here to discuss the merits, and I have been listening for 2 weeks of the misrepresentations about this bill, its impact on this body, and its effects on county government going forward.
So my question,
yes, sir,
was, and I'll repeat it, about the composition, the
yes.
concerns I have.
Can you speak to
the composition?
So when Ben Kramer was preparing this legislation to take a look at, is it maybe time after 100 years to do for what Montgomery County, every other jurisdiction in the state of Maryland does? It has its land use and planning as close to the people of the jurisdiction as we can make it happen. Every other jurisdiction in the state. So I'm looking at this and thinking, how do we maybe look at to make it happen? We've got to have the right people. It never dawned on me that this was going to become somebody claiming council versus executive branches. That's why I never looked at the task force as, oh, we have got to have absolute parity between a council appointment, an executive appointment. I was looking at what are the logical appointments. So let's take a look at who the members of the task force are. One member of the Senate, one member of the House of Delegates. Folks, like it or not, Park and Planning Commission's a creature of state government. Period, end of story. The chair of the Montgomery County Planning Board. Seemed to me that made good sense. Why wouldn't I want the chair there to be part of the conversation? the county executive. Yeah, that would seem logical. The president of the county council. I think that seemed like a good idea. The director of Montgomery County Department of Permitting Services. Well, why would we possibly want that? Well, if we're going to bring land use and permitting and planning under county government, who's got the most knowledge on the subject? The department head. If the county council says, Ben, we've got experts on this as well, I will welcome the opportunity to amend this bill and to add anyone that would be bringing benefit to the task force.
Senator,
Mr. President,
there are a number of my colleagues who want to speak. I'm sure some of them will ask you for clarifying questions.
Mr. President, I didn't come here today to be shut down. I am here to try to clarify.
You have not been shut down, sir. You've been speaking for nearly 15 minutes. That is not being shut down. I looked it up in Merriam-Webster.
Mr. President, I am here because there was so much misrepresentation about this bill that, yes, I want clarification. Sir. And I have not finished because if
I asked you, Senator
Mr. President,
Kramer,
please let me finish and I will wrap it up. But this is important.
Please do so.
Folks, take a look at the timeline on this legislation. The report's not due until December of 2024. It would require actual legislation to implement any possible changes. It will be 2025 or 26. It would have to be 26 at the earliest before any change would come. What does that mean? End of your term, end of the county executive's term. This nonsense, this is a power grab by the exec, which won't even occur until after the county exec is no longer, unless reelected, the county exec. I think we need to put an exclamation mark on that, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I'll at least put a period there, so thank you. I will just end on this note because we do have a lot of people who want to chime in. This is a 96-year-old agency. If we are true to making sure that government is working, I think we should always strive for reform. There are no other policies that are on the table. And so I'm striving to figure out how we do that. How do we have that conversation about being better and having a more efficient operation here? This is not necessarily the right vehicle for that change, but lacking any other, I'm simply asking that we have these conversations, and whether it is something that we take up here at the council or that we work to refine this legislation so that, in my opinion, it is more evenly balanced between the branches and the jurisdictions, I would be open to that. But right now I'll turn it over to my colleagues. Next up is Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thought we were here to determine whether or not this body was going to support, oppose, hold bills, and it seems like an interesting conversation that we're having in order to do so. My views on this legislation are well documented. I shared them previously. I'm very concerned about what the makeup of the body is, what the intention is here. I think it is telling that the county council was not consulted in discussing this bill. I think it's an important point to note. I understand and appreciate the impassioned comments
with all due respect, this is the conversation.
My time has not been yielded to you, Senator. I appreciate the passion. I have a lot of respect for you and for your service, for your family's service. I think that this is a very unfortunate conversation that we're having in the way that we're having it. And I think that the way that this bill was put forward is part of the reason for that. I agree with colleagues that there is opportunity for conversations about land use, about governance, about process. I will say two things. One, I can't say anything today that would be more on point than what the person here who has the most experience with this conversation, including me, including you, Senator, with all due respect, our colleague, Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez. And I want to associate myself with her comments because I think that they're critically important to this conversation. And the idea that she wasn't consulted, no other members of this body were consulted, no current or former planning board members, as far as I can tell, have been consulted, is very unfortunate when you're talking about the level of disruption in this conversation that was had. And I want to go back to the aspect of the staff and just reiterate the comments that have been made by multiple colleagues about how important it is for this county council, and I would hope for our state delegation, to offer the level of support for the professionals in that agency who have done incredible work, who take a lot of unfortunate negative commentary and feedback from the public from doing the work that they do. And the fact that we would diminish their work, we would downplay their work, we would introduce disruption to them being able to continue their work, I think is very deeply unfortunate. And the last thing that I will say on this is seizing the unfortunate situation that has recently occurred is very unfortunate. I think is very unhelpful. And I also think we have to reiterate that the system that we have set up, this 96-year-old system, as has been noted, worked. And I just want to end my comments on that. The conversation in many ways as part of this so-called hyperbolic discussion has created the idea that somehow, based on what transpired over the last several months by individual planning board members, creates the reason for everything being blown up, when in fact the council's oversight over the planning board, promptly addressing those issues, restoring confidence in the public, creating stability among the hardworking staff, I don't think we can lose sight of that. And I think it is disrespectful, and I think it is deeply unfortunate to suggest to the directors who are here and the staffs that they lead that somehow there is a problem among the staff. There is not a problem among the staff.
Did you hear me say any comments about being
I also
problems
didn't hear me
amongst
yielding
the
my
staff,
time
sir?
to you, sir.
Senator.
No,
With respect.
I've heard that repeatedly,
Senator.
and I'm not going to be bullied into not responding to someone who's saying that, making the accusation that somehow I attacked staff. Staff was not mentioned in the conversation, council member.
With all due respect, I think if anybody is watching this conversation and they heard the word bully, I don't think that they'd be referring to anybody who is sitting on this dais. I just want to conclude with the point that the system that we have set up worked, that the staff has continued to do their important function, and that the work of the Parks Department and the planning staff has continued, and it has been of extremely high quality. And I want to end with that because that's where we should start, and that should be the primary focus, is doing the people's work and in supporting the staff who on a day-to-day basis are doing that work. And I just want to appreciate my colleague, the former vice chair of the planning board staff that this legislation seeks to eliminate, and all of my colleagues for the work that we have tried to do in order to support that staff. And with that, I'll yield back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to announce the council members in order who still want to speak. Council members Jawando, Mink, Balcom, and then Sales. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have wide, varying ideological views on this council. I think it's a good thing. We're going to get into a lot of discussions over the next 4 years, and it'll be fun. I've gone to testify in Annapolis many times, seeking support and giving support of bills. Never been before your subcommittee, but I would hope when I come that I wouldn't act the way you have acted today. And I like you a lot, Senator Kramer. But there are things said about all of us. As you know, you've been in politics a long time, your family has served in for a long time, that are not true or mischaracterizations in public and other places, and then we have to come respond to them. I don't think the way you comported yourself today was the appropriate way to do so. And I actually am sympathetic to the bill. I think that, to Council President's point, there are no sacred cows here. We should reevaluate 100-year-old institutions, and I think it would be more appropriate for us to look into it and work with the state. It is a state created entity, you rightly pointed out. I had similar substantive questions to the council president about the balance of the membership. I am still open, despite how I started, to working with you and others to figure out if there's a way to balance it more appropriately and see if there's a way to support it. I'm not against looking into it. I also want to reiterate support for the staff and the interim planning chair and the folks that are working at Park and Planning in the commission. But we can look at it. I think there are a lot of things we do in this county that we could improve upon. We started this council session talking about transparency and accountability. That was the first statement I made of this council session, how we can have better processes that deliver more equitable outcomes. But I would hope we can do so in a way that's respectful and that is a mutual kind of working relationship. And I understand that's been strained. So I'll say to you, I'm still open to that. And I just hope we can reset the conversation here today, because actually when I go to Annapolis, they limit my time to 2-3 minutes. We didn't do that. Let's get it back in line, and let's see if there's ways that either we take the authority and do it. I don't disagree with your goal, but let's do it in a collaborative way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Jawando. Councilmember Mink.
Thank you. I agree with everything that Councilmember Jawando just said, and thank you to my colleagues for your other thoughtful comments as well. And I will note also that I think that a word that you highlighted here today, Senator Kramer, which also was highlighted by council staff, which was feasibility. I was waiting to hear, as a former English teacher, if there were any surprises in that definition. But in fact, it means exactly what I think council staff believed it to mean and what I believe it to mean. And the issue here is that we should be looking at the advisability of this as opposed to other potential reforms. We should be weighing all options. I, again, similar to others, am not opposed to looking at any 100-year-old institutions and see how we can do better. But this bill purports to have already come to a conclusion about what the absolute best method of reform is, and there are an infinite number of measures that we could look at, including the question of whether it needs to be done or not. So for that reason, I'm aligned in opposing this bill.
Thank you. Councilmember Sales.
Was it me or Councilmember Balcom?
Councilmember Balcom is no longer in the queue.
Oh, okay, thank you, sir. So I think the discussion that's taken place here this afternoon further supports the need to have discussions about what transpired in a better way forward. 4 years ago, we only had 9 members on this council. Now we have 11. And so I think we are looking at doing things differently because it no longer works for the majority of our residents to feel like they've been heard, to better reflect the diversity of our county. And so I'm supportive of looking at this legislation and actually proposing amendments to look at how we can have a better oversight for the Planning Commission, better process for selecting the members of the Planning Commission, and whether it's looking at who makes up this body, I'm supportive of having that conversation. And I sympathize with former Planning Commissioner Natalie Fani Gonzalez. I hear your sentiments, and I wouldn't want to, change the designation of who will be able to appoint the members solely into the county executive's office or into one person entirely. But I think that when we do look at a better process and we look at the makeup, I think that's a task force bill that I would be supportive of really studying how we can better oversee this body, the planning, the accountability as well. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no other speakers, and so I'll just, Councilmember Katz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was attempting to.
Okay, there you go.
I mean, slow of hand over here. I too just wanted to note that I appreciate the goal. I do, and I believe we need the discussion. I was going to look up some definitions as you were speaking, Senator, but I didn't have a chance. I decided I was going to speak. But Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez certainly is correct in much of what of her statement, and I agree with much of what she said. The task force itself, to me, is a major part of this discussion, and I couldn't look up the word jury, but it depends on who's on the jury many times what the outcome is going to be, and I think there's great concern about the makeup of this task force, of this discussion. Should there be some changes on a 100-year institution? Sure. To your point about that Prince George's and Montgomery County were about the same size as Allegheny. I happen to be a person that knows something about the 3rd District of Montgomery County, and both Rockville and Gaithersburg individually are larger than Allegheny. So yes, we have some changes, and for the 3rd District, they really would be the least affected by these types of changes because they each have their own zoning authority and planning authority. So I do believe that there needs to be the discussion. I believe that we need to go forward, as others have said, in a way that we can actually be working together so that we can have an outcome, a fair outcome, to know for sure what's happening. So I am opposed to this legislation, but I am not opposed to the idea of someday having a discussion. And I just got an okay from Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez, which is as good as I'm going to get on this topic, on this topic as well. So that's where I am. Thank you very much. And Senator Kramer, I appreciate your passion as well. I do.
Well, and I appreciate that. And my passion was
Senator,
simply related to the misrepresentations, nothing more, Councilman.
So, Senator, thank you for coming this afternoon and sharing with us your passion for this bill and your passion for making reform. And clearly you've heard from almost all of us that there is a shared sentiment whether or not this bill is the right way to achieve that. We will take a vote momentarily to determine that, but I'm getting the sense that we want more conversations. And so I personally invite you to engage with us possibly before next legislative session so that maybe we can all collaboratively produce a bill that meets the goals of reforming a 100-year-old institution without tipping the scales for the outcome of that task force.
And I think the very next bill will also address that issue.
Yes, I expect that. So let's get through this first one. I'm hearing most people want to oppose, so all those in favor of opposing this bill, raise your hand. Okay, that is 10 of us. Ms. McCartney-Green.
Page 7 of your chart, MCPG 105-203. This bill is also for Parks and Planning, and it goes towards the Requirements and Open Meeting Act. Specifically, this bill makes a variety of changes governing the 5 commissioners of Park and Planning who serve on the Montgomery County Planning Board, including the appointment process, term limits, removal, discipline of members, designation of the chair, salaries, outside employment, political activities, and open meetings and training. The bill would provide that the county executive and not the council to appoint the chair of the planning board. It would also require the consent of the executive in order for the council to discipline or remove a planning board member. It would prohibit, as I mentioned, certain political activities. Finally, the bill would add a requirement for agenda or summary to be finalized of the planning board and be posted 72 hours in advance of the meeting. This bill would diminish the authority of the county council, and the recommendation here from staff is to oppose.
Thank you. We have 2 council members who want to speak. Councilmember Ludke, followed by Balcom.
Well, one of my questions dealt with sections 15.121, proposed section 15.121, and proposed section 15.123 of the bill, which deal with restriction of First Amendment rights on political campaign activity, but only for the Montgomery County members of the commission, and the same for 15.123, which requires the training on diversity, equity, inclusion, implicit bias, and harassment, but only for Montgomery County members. I wanted to know whether or not that type of training was already required in some other fashion, although not explicitly stated in state law under current county policies. And then with respect to the political campaigning activity and the restriction of one portion of the commission's First Amendment rights versus another, versus the Prince George's County members, whether there were legal concerns that staff had related to those two issues.
Sponsors not here, just wanted to make sure if there were other comments. One, I can speak to the Racial Equity and Social Justice Act that was enacted by this council that does have some requirements when it comes to training of racial equity. But your second question concerning the First Amendment, council staff has not had that opportunity, and happy to look into that just to see if that raises any legal concerns there.
Thank you. I mean, it's my understanding that state ethics laws and local county ethics laws also preclude certain types of activity already, and have already struck that balance, but then to place this in state law, disproportionately affecting or further restricting the First Amendment rights of one county's participants to the commission versus another would be inequitable in and of itself.
Thank you. Councilmember Balcom.
Thank you. I want to touch on two issues. One is the larger global issue of what problem are we trying to solve. If it's an undue influence issue, right now we're going in the wrong direction. Right now we have 11 people determining who the planning board chair is, and Councilmember Fana Gonzalez identified this in her earlier statement. It's just going in the wrong direction. Not only are we the most diverse group seated here, but there's a geographic issue that I'm concerned about. And so I can't imagine going from 11 people to one identifying who that planning board chair is. I don't think that my geographic needs would be considered in that regard. But then also from the perspective of, similar to what Councilmember Ludke was talking about in terms of the training, some of the issues in this bill I think are good ideas, but the jurisdictional issue, I can't imagine why the state would have jurisdiction over an issue as minute as mandatory training, for instance, on the Open Meetings Act. That's a good idea, but that's something that the council should have jurisdiction over. So I oppose this bill. Thank you.
There are no other speakers for this, so I'm Councilmember Albernas.
Thanks. I'll just note, it's been mentioned before, but what's transpired the last 4 months has been unprecedented. And there were many different facets to that issue that would not have been appropriate or legal for this council to have discussed in open sessions and with our public. And so I don't want what transpired these last 4 months to be in any way indicative of the public process that we normally follow with all appointments. It was unusual, and hopefully will never happen again. But I also think that illustrates why it's important for, as a body, us to have the collective responsibility, because I feel that in that unfortunate and unprecedented circumstance, the council did step forward and appropriately exerted its authority, which demonstrates that the current system has more pros than cons. So we are absolutely going to have to be open with the public, as we will be through the appointment process this next year. But I just wanted to underscore that, because there's been a lot written about this, and it was an unusual circumstance, to say the least.
Thank you. As has been noted, we need more conversations about this, and taking these opportunities to share our thoughts is important. Councilmember Mink.
I agree with the views of my council colleagues, and we'll just shine an extra light on that. I appreciate efforts to further transparency. I know that that's something that we as a body want to undertake for ourselves as well, and so I know we value that. But this does not seem like the right vehicle to do that, and potentially not the right reforms either.
Thank you. Councilmember Stewart.
Great, thank you. Just want to associate myself with the comments of my colleagues and to take the moment to agree that there are some things in here about reducing duplication and increasing transparency that are laudable goals we should look into. I also want to just thank my colleagues who were on the County Council prior to this for your hard work. This has been unprecedented times, and the work that you did to get us through last year to set up a planning board and the staff now at the planning department was commendable. And I just want to say thank you for that. And I look forward to continuing this work together and believe that we can do this work.
Applications are open for 3 seats. If anyone's interested, you'll hear more about that tomorrow during announcements. So I'm hearing everybody opposed without objection. Okay.
The next bill, 10723, is really a bill that is applies to Prince George's County. It would alter requirements in Prince George's County regarding circumstances which a party may appeal certain zoning determinations. Council staff is no position.
Any comments? Any objections to staff recommendation? No opinion? So be it.
Our last bill for today is MCPG 10923, also park and planning. This is concerning the members. So the bill would eliminate the requirement that not more than 3 planning board members would be of the same political party. Council staff comments here is that the membership should represent a diversity of the county. The current requirement that only requires a political party is not reflective of the county and overly restricts the search of a qualified planning board member. Instead, it would be more open to reflect racial, gender, ethnic, political, and geographic diversity of the county overall. So council staff recommendation here is to support the removal of that requirement.
Thank you. I personally support this legislation and the recommendation. Not quite sure if it was listed in the staff report as to when that requirement was originally added, but as we've been talking about a 96-year-old institution, times have certainly changed, not only over 96 years, but over the last 20 or 30. And so I think we need to put the best people on the Planning Commission, regardless of their political affiliation, and I would support the legislation. Any other comments? Councilmember Fani Gonzalez, and then Juwando.
Can I please ask the acting planning board chair to speak on this issue?
Sure, thank you. For those who don't know me, I'm Jeff Zients. I'm sort of new to this role, but that's okay.
If you can get closer to the mic, sir.
I'm sorry, I'll get closer to the mic. I should know this already. The planning board did take this up as it did with the other pieces of legislation. It has no position on this because it's above our pay grade. But personally, from my point of view, this will aid the council to get the people who should be in the job. It doesn't, political parties don't speak to the diversity that I think you're looking for. And I think this bill would benefit the council.
I agree. I have to say that.
Thank you. Councilmember Juwando.
Thank you. I certainly understand the intent here and agree with it that we want diversity of thought and geography and race and ethnicity. And what I would be concerned about and just wanted to publicly say is that this is not, we're not doing this to favor a political party. We're doing it to make sure we get qualified, diverse candidates. And so I do think that's important because, when people see what this is expressly stating to do, it could be seen as a way to limit diverse views, and we're actually looking at ways to increase diversification in views. So one of the things I would ask Delegate Foley if she were here, and I looked at the bill, was, it might make sense to enumerate the types of diversity of thought and opinion that we're, just to underscore that. And I'm pulling up, I didn't and either in the non, codified language or something. I just think it's an important point to make. So I'd be happy to say support it, but I was just with the suggestion that we talk about what we are looking for in that positive way, and suggest that to the bill sponsor.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. Appreciate my colleague and share similar views. I think it's important that the intention, and I think Interim Chair Zients, I could just call you Chair Zients, but mention this as well, that the intention here is to have a diversity of thought, and that is ultimately the goal. The question is whether or not the current requirement achieves the intended goal. But I think we need to put in some replacement guardrail, and I think we can include that perhaps in our support statement that includes other standards, including, as Councilmember Balcom mentioned earlier, geographic diversity. One of the great concerns in land use and transportation planning in the county that has spanned decades is the question of geographic diversity and geographic needs, and how the county is quite different depending on where you are and what community you're in. There's a lot of sensitivity to that. It was a great part of emphasis of some of the political conversations that we've had related to elections. It's some of the great conversations that we've had related to Thrive and other land use documents, of whether or not we were appropriately reflecting the policy interests of every geographic part of our county. And so I agree with that. I hope that when we talk about some of the demographics, and gender and other dynamics, that we also be sure to include geographic, because I think that has been heard today, and I want to lift it up, but it also is something that is very consistent, as we all know, in what we hear from residents.
I appreciate that sentiment, and I would actually add that Delegate Foley enumerated so much so that she explicitly state that we fill the vacancies in accordance with racial equity and social justice law, which is Montgomery County standing law, right? Good. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I certainly agree with what my colleagues have said. I think it should be noted, as Councilmember Giwando had pointed out earlier, but I think it should be noted, we've actually had people change party so that they can apply for positions. And that's not the idea of this type of thought. So we need the diversity of thought. We don't need someone to pretend that they're in one party or another. So I think this would go a long way to clear that up. Thank you.
So it sounds like we're all in support with a friendly recommendation / amendment, right? Okay. Ms. McCartney-Green.
That concludes. Our next state legislative meeting is scheduled for January 23rd.
Very good. Well, thank you, colleagues, for keeping me on my toes today. Lively discussion, but the bottom line is we have to have more discussion about some of these issues. So thank you all very much, and we're adjourned.